we got a little bit sidetracked on aspects of being a missionary kid. I do think that that's important as far as the story goes, but I thought it might be good to get back to the aspects of the timeline. So we were back in the States for a while after Africa. What was interesting at this point was that I was old enough to kind of know that something was going on once my parents started talking about going to the next country. And it was also interesting because I think my parents made it a little bit more an aspect of a family thing. So for example, I remember my dad flying to, if he flew or drove, we lived in Alabama at the time, near my grandparents and my aunt and uncle. And my dad's missions organization was based, I believe, out of Atlanta, Georgia. So not too far away. He probably drove. But I remember my dad going to a meeting. An interesting meeting because it was with one of his old bosses who, needless to say, one of my younger brothers is named after. And I remember my dad kind of coming home and talking about this opportunity to be able to go to a country that was like just opening up. And I remember kind of trying to understand what that meant. I knew that the previous countries we'd lived in, as far as Egypt goes, it was a closed country, meaning it was illegal to convert anyone to a different religion, from Islam primarily. And my dad started talking about a few different places. It wasn't just Kazakhstan. I'm pretty sure Pakistan was on the list, and potentially another place over in the Middle East. And so I remember him starting to talk about that, talking about the opportunities. I remember that he went on a trip. I don't remember him necessarily being gone, but I remember afterwards hearing a lot of the things about his trip. He went to each country and visited and got to see what it was like. He's often shared the story of when he was in Kazakhstan. He stayed at one of these hotels that was one of the higher buildings at the time in the area. And he was looking out his window and like God told him, you're supposed to go to Kazakhstan. So that's when life started changing for us in the States. My parents at one point, I'm not sure if we were renting or if we owned or what, but I remember moving out of our house. I'm pretty sure we lived with my grandparents for a little while. I remember my parents, I remember my parents learning Russian. So they had like tapes that we would listen to in the car, and we would practice our Russian together, and I learned a few words that way. I remember packing up all our boxes. We were like full-blown moving overseas. It wasn't like just for a few years, it was like indefinite. And so we had boxes and boxes and boxes of our stuff, and we had to get that over there. And at the time, the only way to get to Kazakhstan, the only flights that existed were through Moscow. And I remember that very vividly because we had to get actually, am I remembering two different trips? I might be. I do know that it was still through Moscow. I know that we had to fly into Moscow and go from one airport to a different airport because there was the international airport and there was the domestic, I guess, airport. And so to fly in, we flew to one and then have to drive to the other. I'm pretty sure it was two different trips because the first time I'm remembering we were in taxis. We might have been in two different taxis. Probably so. Maybe not. I don't remember exactly how we traveled that one because that was kind of early on. I remember the airports though. So the boxes thing might have come a little bit later. Like I said, I'm horrible with timeline, but we'll go with the fact that I'm pretty sure we went without the boxes first. We had to do the travel thing. I remember the airports. I remember very distinctly, and I know that this was the first time when we got to Kazakhstan. I was sitting outside on the steps of the airport while my dad was inside trying to figure out some of our luggage and figure out how and where we were supposed to go. And I remember holding my little sister Natalie and looking at the mountains because we'd never lived anywhere with mountains before, not like this. I mean, these were like huge mountains, snow covered all year long, like gorgeous. And most of the places we lived did not have those kind of mountains, and we were just looking at the mountains. And I remember that was my very first moment of realizing that we were in Kazakhstan. It was my first moment of like, this is our new home. And for me, that was really impactful because Kazakhstan, really, there's a lot of stories. And I'm gonna share a lot more because as that's really where my teenage years happened. I grew up a whole lot there. It's really where I believe that I kind of started my relationship with God. It's where I experienced tons of different things. So Kazakhstan's gonna have lots of stories. But that was how we got there. I'll go back really quickly before I finish this video. I think what happened was my dad and my sister and I, Valerie, my oldest sister, we went back to the States to get our stuff. I think that's what it was. I'm not sure how much later in the timeline it was. But the big thing about it was we had like, I don't know, I want to say 20 boxes or so. And so we had to pay for those and get them through. And then when we drove from one airport to the other, we weren't in taxis this time. We had to rent a bus. I'm pretty sure that time it was really cool, actually. My dad took my sister and I to Red Square because we had a long layover in between. And so we used that van, we went to Red Square. I remember walking around Red Square in Moscow, like the one and only time I've ever done that. So anyways, that was the time with the boxes. We eventually made it to Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan's gonna have a lot of stories. I'm excited to tell you about them. But for today, we'll leave it at that. Talk to you guys tomorrow.